We do have a quorum, so we'll call the meeting to order. Without objection, we'll proceed with the agenda that has been publicly noticed. Agenda item number 1 is the report of the chairman. And I note with some sadness the recent death of a longtime friend and colleague of NCPC, Reginald Griffith. Mr. Griffith served as NCPC's executive director from 1979 to 1999. And prior to that, he served as a mayoral appointee to the commission. While a number of important projects and plans marked his tenure, it was likely the Extending the Legacy, Planning America's Capital for the 21st Century project that was among his most signature projects. So on behalf of the Commission, we extend our sincere condolences to Mr. Griffin's family and to his friends and colleagues. Many here knew him and worked with him.
Mr. Chairman, I think I may be one of the only commissioners that knew him and worked with him, and I was honored to do that. He was a very special guy, a very thoughtful guy, and he really laid the foundation for all that we do now. And I think we were doing things then that were sort of groundbreaking, and that we were sort of a new entity and a new government. And now we are building on that and doing a good job of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dixon. Agenda item number 2 is the report of the Executive Director, Mr. Acosta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and also on behalf of the staff, I'd like to extend our condolences to Mr. Griffith's family. Some of our staff members are still here who have worked with him, including Deborah Young and Tony Champ, and I see Tony Simons there, who was a former NCPC staffer, and so they've all had the great honor of working with him, and as you said, we do continue his legacy through our work today, and we do honor that. Just a few items to note for the agenda, for my report. On Monday, May 15th at 6:30 p.m., NCPC and the National Building Museum will host Modernist Landscapes Reconsidered, and that will focus on how 20th century modernist landscapes should respond to contemporary expectations of public space. The conversation will be moderated by Brad McKee, the editor of Landscape Architecture magazine, and feature notable landscape architects Gary Hildebrand and Elizabeth Myers. We hope that the Commissioner and the general public can attend that session. Should the Commission authorize the public release of the draft submission guidelines and environmental policies and procedures today, we plan to hold 2 meetings to brief the general public and other agencies on Tuesday, May 23rd from 6 o'clock to 7:30 p.m. and on Thursday, May 25th from 9:30 to 11 o'clock a.m. Both meetings will take place right here at NCPC's offices. Also, the public comment period is tentatively scheduled from Monday, May 8th through Thursday, June 22nd. Finally, just of note, on Tuesday, May 9th at 4 p.m., NCPC will host a public NEPA scoping meeting at the Carnegie Library to introduce their renovation project, aka the Apple Store, and invite public comment on the range of issues that will be addressed in the environmental assessment. And also on May 17th at 4 p.m., we will also host a Section 106 consultation meeting about the Carnegie Library, and that will be held right here at NCPC. And that concludes my report for today.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Acosta? You can't wait for the Apple Store, can you? Agenda item number 3 is a legislative update. Our General Counsel, Ms. Schuyler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually have 5 items to report on today. The first is Senate Joint Resolution Number 1, which is a bill to approve the location of a memorial to commemorate and honor members of the armed forces who served on active duty in support of Operation Desert Storm and Operation Desert Shield. Actually was passed and signed into law by the President. It is now Public Law Number 115-118, and its essential content is to propose placement of the memorial in Area 1. The second item is H.R. 19, which is the Smithsonian Women's History Act. It was introduced on March 30th and sent to committee, and it establishes within the Smithsonian Museum a comprehensive women's history museum. It requires site selection with 6 months of the act becoming law. Third item is H.R. 1073. A bill to authorize the Secretary of the Interior to establish a structure for visitor services on the Arlington Ridge Tract in the area of the Marine Corps Memorial. This was introduced in February, and it has been referred to both the House Committee on Natural Resources and its Subcommittee on Public Lands. The next two items are two museums. There's two museums, two bills for a National Museum on Asia Pacific American History and Culture. And the second is a bill to establish a commission to study the potential creation of a National Museum on Irish history. They will be working their way through the legislative process. Thank you.
Any questions for Ms. Schuyler?
I have a quick clarification on the Smithsonian Women's History Museum. Did that pass as a law?
No, sir. It was
No.
just introduced in the end, March 30th of this year.
Okay, and
So it's gone into the several House committees and subcommittees.
and you mentioned 6 months to find a location. That's part of this process?
Correct. That's contained in the bill.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
I'll
Mr. Mayor.
comment on a couple things. First of all, in case anybody is wondering about the visitor services structure at Arlington Ridge, that has to do with the fact that we are not permitted to build even a restroom facility there because of the legislation that was introduced to keep the Air Force Memorial from being located on that site. That was a controversy a few years ago. So that was the law that Congress passed, so it meant that we couldn't do anything. So we've had porta potties out there for a very long time, and we need to be able to have restrooms. So that's what that's about. So we appreciate the fact that that's been introduced again. It almost passed in another bill last Congress. For the museums, the two new ones, I mean, in case anyone's not familiar, it's usually sort of a two-step thing. The first thing is authorizing something to study
Right.
the feasibility of it. I think the second two were feasibility studies, as it were. Women's History Museum actually went through the feasibility study stage, produced a report to the Congress that was, I think that came in the fall. And so then this is the next step, is the authorization of that museum. So they take a long time to get through.
Agenda item number 4 is the consent calendar. We have 7 items on the consent calendar. Item 4A is comments on the draft master plan for the James J. Rowley Training Center located in Laurel, Maryland, submitted to us by the Secret Service. Item 4B is for modifications to Building 58 at Fort McNair, located in Southwest Washington, brought to us by the Department of the Army. Item 4C is for comments on the concept design for a gate redesign, Marine Barracks Washington Annex, located at 8th and I Street Southeast. It's a Navy project. Item 4D is the concept design for a building relocation at Joint Base Andrews, submitted to us by the Navy. Item 4E is the concept design for a new hangar facility at Joint Base Andrews, also presented to us by the Department of the Navy. Item 4F is preliminary and final site plans for flood hardening projects at the Federal Triangle and Smithsonian Metro stations. That's brought to us by the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority. And last, item 4G is final site and building plans for the new Orr Elementary School at 2200 Minnesota Avenue Southeast. That is brought to us by the District Department of General Services. Any questions on any item on the consent calendar?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
So I just want to make a comment on 4G. So without commenting on the merits of why some of these projects outside of the central district area come to us for review, I do want to note that this is a request for final approval and site plans, and this building is well under construction and I think set to open next year. So I just, even though necessarily it shouldn't have to come here, I want to say that if it does, I would appreciate it would be nice if the District Department of General Services could plan it out a little bit better and get us final site approval before they actually start construction. So just wanted to throw my 2 cents in on that. And I'll
Understood.
pass it along to Mr. Shaw next time I see him.
All in, hearing no more comments, all in favor of the consent calendar? Is there a motion on the consent calendar?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor of the consent calendar, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Thank you. We have, moving right along, we have just one individual action item and then one very good information presentation. So we have a short agenda today. Agenda item 5A is the update of NCPC submission guidelines and environmental policies and procedures. This is primarily a procedural document for our review of plans and projects. And as Mr. Fliss may say, this has been many years, it's been a couple of years in the making after more than 25 years of having not updated them at all. Let no one say we're not a traditional organization. So we spent a lot of staff time and resources with a lot of stakeholder input on this that's coming before you. Mr. Fliss.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that introduction, as well as members of the Commission. Beginning last year, staff has been focused on improving our plan and project review process. And as one of our first steps, we updated the EDR format, which you're now familiar with, to make it more concise as well as accessible. We later provided an information presentation to you on our work to evaluate and update the submission guidelines as well as the environmental policies and procedures. The guidelines form the foundation of the plan and project review process, which is the predominant focus of the Commission's work. Today, staff is here to request authorization to release the draft submission guidelines, as well as the environmental policies for a 45-day public comment period. I'm going to provide you an overview of the update, as well as point out some of the specific changes that are proposed. Revising the guidelines and environmental policies is an important step which aims to make the process clear and understandable, streamlined where possible, and ultimately create better planning outcomes for the Commission, applicants, staff, and the public. As you're aware, the current administration, through several recent executive orders, has placed a significant emphasis on improving agency efficiency and effectiveness. NCPC staff have proactively identified opportunities to streamline procedures and realign activities that are more appropriately managed at the local level. As such, we believe these recommendations are responsive to administration goals. So before I get into the guidelines themselves, it's helpful to understand a little bit of the context. There are several procedures that guide the work of the Commission. For example, the Commission bylaws govern how the Commission functions, and the standing rules include rules related to the order of business. Of course, the Commission's authorities and responsibilities are largely derived from several major acts, including the Planning Act and the Commemorative Works Act. Per these acts, the Commission reviews many types of projects, and the submission guidelines directs applicants on what to submit. Finally, our environmental policies are required by CEQ and apply to any project to which the Commission has an approval. So what are the submission guidelines? Simply, they guide the plan and project review process, and as such are a critical tool to the work of the Commission. Agencies that submit their proposals to the Commission follow the requirements and proceed through the steps that are laid out in the guidelines. They tell applicants what to submit, describe the stages of review, and provide a roadmap for staff, applicants, the public, and the Commission in terms of interaction and engagement. So just in case you're wondering and you haven't seen them before, these are some images of the current submission guidelines, including those for our more common projects like site and building plans, master plans, and antennas. These have been adopted individually and over time. The environmental policies and procedures inform the submission guidelines by describing how NCPC will comply with the requirements of the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. The Council of Environmental Quality, or CEQ, requires all federal agencies to adopt their own NEPA procedures. NCPCs haven't been updated since 2004. By contrast, the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation has adopted regulations for compliance with the Historic Preservation Act, which all agencies must follow. Together, the submission guidelines and the environmental policies inform the review process. Staff has worked with a consultant who helped to reach out to applicants and provide a detailed assessment of the existing guidelines. The consultant met with staff and also researched the planning review processes for several cities, including the District of Columbia, and also worked with federal agencies which operate in the National Capital Region. These included the U.S. Commission of Fine Arts, the General Services Administration, the Department of Defense, and the National Park Service. an issues paper that summarized the main issues of the current guidelines and incorporated best practices from planning jurisdictions was created. 2 rounds of interviews with applicant agencies were also held to inform the revised guidelines. The purpose of the interviews was to request input on the existing guidelines, understand opportunities for improvement, and also better understand their own internal design and review processes. So regarding the environmental policies, staff worked closely with CEQ through the entire process and also coordinated with ACHP on questions related to Section 106. CEQ approval was necessary before releasing the draft policies for public comment. So what have we learned? There's several things. First, and most simply, the existing guidelines haven't been updated in some time. Therefore, this is the opportunity to evaluate their content, how they work, as well as their user friendliness. At the same time, the requirements for different review stages appear to be the same, and so the distinction between preliminary and final reviews really isn't that clear. Part of this is related to the coordination with NEPA and Section 106, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Altogether, we saw an opportunity to address these issues and therefore improve the effectiveness and efficiency of the review process. Many of the challenges for the environmental policies were very similar. They lacked organization and clarity, and the stages of review were not well aligned with the applicant's process or the NEPA stages. Staff also saw other opportunities to streamline the process and improve efficiency. As a result, staff then identified 3 objectives to address these issues regarding both documents. First, they should be clear, accessible, and efficient, and respond to applicant needs. Second, the review stages should align with NEPA to save time and resources in the planning process. And finally, they should allow some projects to be exempt from review where there is no federal interest. So regarding the first objective, the guidelines should be clearly written, accessible, organized logically, and reflective of the Commission's needs. This will help applicants better navigate the submission guidelines, as well as the application process, thereby benefiting the Commission, applicants, as well as staff. As such, the revised guidelines include clear language and text, as well as an improved organization. A standard application form is also proposed. Guidelines for the different project types, including master plans, antennas, and commemorative works, have all been added in clear and distinct chapters. Here you can see the list of all the project types that the Commission actually reviews. Currently, guidelines for these varying project types are found in multiple documents in different locations, and this can make it hard for applicants to find or use them. Under the revised guidelines, applicants may refer directly to individual chapters for each of these particular project types. Similarly, the environmental policies have also been restructured for clarity and efficiency, and references to unnecessary information have been eliminated. So moving on to the second objective, one of the key things that we heard from both applicants and staff is that the review stages themselves were not clearly defined or aligned with the applicant's own development process or the NEPA requirements. As a result, the update of the submission guidelines includes revised project review stages. We believe the proposed realignment better matches with the applicant agency processes and proposed revisions to the NEPA procedures. Most importantly, and I'll walk you through this in more detail, NEPA will no longer be completed at the preliminary review stage and will instead be completed at the final review. I'm going to first talk to you about these changes to NEPA as they are really critical to this realignment. So we heard from staff and applicants that requiring NEPA to be completed at the preliminary review unnecessarily required the project to be more developed than necessary for that stage. This resulted in significant decision-making occurring before the Commission reviewed or provided any feedback. In the realigned review stages, NEPA will be completed at the final stage, therefore allowing the Commission to provide more substantive and meaningful guidance earlier in the process. This will help direct applicants before projects are too far along to change. Under the new alignment, NEPA should be initiated at the concept stage, a draft document prepared by preliminary review, and a final NEPA determination made by final approval. So the diagram that's on the screen in front of you shows the differences in the two processes. The top shows you the current process, including both the review stages in the gray or white and the NEPA stages in blue. The bottom shows you the proposed stages and the respective NEPA requirements. To help expedite the NEPA process and project review, we've also included several other changes, including new categorical exclusions. These are essentially actions that over time have been found to result in no significant impact. A categorical exclusion, or CADX, means that no additional NEPA documentation is required. A few exclusions were eliminated that were outdated, and new exclusions were added for some projects like solar panel arrays. One new CADX worth mentioning allows NCPC to categorically exclude a project for which the applicant has applied its own categorical exclusion, but for which NCPC has no such exclusion. Again, this means NCPC will not have to duplicate another agency's work. In the past, when such a circumstance arose, NCPC found itself in the position of preparing an environmental assessment, which usually resulted in a finding of no significant impact. The new categorical exclusion renders it possible to streamline the NEPA process while still remaining true to the spirit and intent of the law. One other important change we think will help expedite the NEPA process relates to the application of extraordinary circumstances. These are basically conditions that would require the preparation of environmental assessment. We've added language that allows the application of the categorical exclusion where the potential for impacts to a resource can be addressed through another process like Section 106. In such a case, if the Section 106 process has resolved the issues of impacts on historic resources, the categorical exclusion can be applied. This eliminates the duplication of effort by requiring both a NEPA analysis as well as Section 106. This may be particularly helpful for some of our non-federal federal applicants where the project impacts, particularly in the city, are typically limited to historic preservation issues. So while on this topic, I'll briefly mention some of the other changes to the environmental policies, which are intended to both provide clarity as well as enhance the process. In an effort to clarify roles and responsibilities, the regulations distinguish more clearly between federal agency and non-federal agency applicants. Federal agencies, by definition, are cabinet departments and executive agencies of the federal government, while non-federal agencies are just that. They're not. They are subject to NCPC's jurisdiction because they're either undertaking a project on federal land or by statute and are obligated to bring their projects to NCPC for review. Some of them are shown here on the bottom of the screen. So the environmental policies use the applicant type as the basis for assigning lead and cooperating agency status in the NEPA process. Federal agency applicants are generally assigned the role of lead agency for applications they bring to the Commission, in which case NCPC serves as the cooperating agency, and this is shown on the left. In the case of non-federal agency applicants, NCPC serves as the lead because NCPC is legally obligated to comply with NEPA. In this case, the non-federal agency serves as a cooperating agency, but with a slightly higher status because they are the project owner. The proposed regulations list the obligations of the lead and cooperating agencies to ensure each party knows and understands what tasks it is obligated to perform in its assigned role. The assignment of roles between federal and non-federal agency applicants has really not changed from the current regulations. However, it is highlighted a little bit better in the new structure. NCPC intends to consistently implement the assigned roles as between NCPC and non-federal agencies going forward under the new regulations. This will allow us to become involved in the project earlier and help in the development of alternatives, and also affords NCPC an opportunity to be more active in the NEPA process. One of the ways that we're going to propose to do this is through the use of memoranda of understandings, either project-specific or programmatic with particular agencies, to help define the requirements of NEPA and the responsibilities of lead, co-lead, and cooperating agencies. Staff believes that MOUs will help clarify the process and provide a clear path through NEPA compliance. The policies also include options for the use of programmatic documents, which include a high-level NEPA review with tiered analysis for follow-on or more detailed projects that might come later. And finally, the policies also allow NCPC to co-sign another agency's NEPA documents, including the finding of no significant impact or record of decision. In the past, so that you're aware, NCPC has had to duplicate these documents, requiring substantial time and effort. This duplication can now be avoided through co-signing. So what does all of this mean for the review process? This graphic shows the recommendations for the revised submission stages, including the associated NEPA and Section 106 timing. At the first stage, all projects will be required to submit will be considered at a pre-submission briefing, where NCPC staff and the applicant meet to discuss the proposed project, to identify potential issues and concerns early, and to communicate the materials and level of detail that will be necessary for the next submission stage. The briefing might also be an email or phone conversation for a simpler or smaller project. At concept review, the Commission will provide input into the applicant's NEPA approach, the range of project alternatives, and the general consistency of the alternatives with the Commission's policies. This stage of review will be important to identify any red flags early so that changes can be made. Concept review is generally recommended for more complex projects such as commemorative works, but it will not be required for every project. The preliminary review stage includes a substantive critique of the project. The Commission will review the applicant's preferred alternative, or if the applicant has not selected one, the Commission can help in selecting a preferred design. The preliminary review is generally the most extensive stage of review because it is the best opportunity for the Commission to provide feedback in the process. And then finally, the final review stage will be the opportunity for the Commission to confirm the design details developed since preliminary review and understand how applicants have responded to their comments. Both NEPA and Section 106, again, would be completed at this stage. The updated guidelines also realign the NEPA process to help better support the review stages for commemorative works. Previously, site approval occurred in advance of the memorial design development and approval. Under the revised process, commemorative works will be reviewed at the concept level, first for site selection and then for memorial design within the proposed sites. This will allow the Commission to consider both site and design in their decision-making process. At preliminary review, the Commission can then approve the site and design with comments and recommendations to be addressed by final review. The NEPA process will occur in parallel to the review stages, culminating in a decision document at the time of the final approval. So moving on now to the third objective, staff has added a series of review exceptions to the proposed guidelines. Projects that meet the exceptions would not require Commission review or approval. In general, these are smaller or non-controversial projects where there is generally no impact and no federal interest. NCPC staff will review each project at the pre-submission briefing to determine whether an exception may apply. An applicant cannot make this determination independently. The revised and expanded exceptions are intended to help focus Commission reviews on those projects for which there are important planning and design issues to be addressed related to the federal interest. So here on the screen in front of you is an overview of the proposed new exceptions. Many refer to projects which have no federal interest and are generally best addressed by local agencies, and others, such as minor site and building improvements for federal facilities, will help expedite their review. Again, these projects must still be submitted to NCPC for review and a final determination of whether an exception actually applies. In addition to clarifying legal requirements, we've added an expiration of the final approval and a substantive change provision to help the Commission ensure their project approvals remain in compliance with the applicable legal requirements and retain the approved project features. The expiration helps to ensure that the decisions remain relevant for projects that may take many years to implement. Expirations help to ensure that site changes or new requirements are revisited if the project is not implemented within 5 years of initial approval. The revised guidelines also explain how changes to projects after the Commission's review can be handled, specifically highlighting that if a substantial change is made, the applicant may need to come back to the Commission for an updated approval. Staff will work with the applicants to help determine whether the project meets the definition of substantial change, but is really incumbent upon the applicant to come and talk with staff to see if they need to come back. In addition, staff is going to also be updating the project approvals that may be delegated to the chairman or the executive director. These generally include small or non-controversial projects that have been successfully resolved through agency coordination in advance of the formal submission. The delegations are internal operating procedures and therefore are not included as part of the guidelines today. However, because they are relevant to the review process, staff will be bringing these back to you for a separate approval in the future. So based upon all these recommendations, we've attempted to summarize what the impacts might mean for the varying stakeholders. For the Commission, we think better differentiating the review stages and realigning NEPA compliance will allow the Commission to provide more substantive and meaningful guidance earlier in the process. This will also help direct applicants before projects are too far along to change. For applicants, of course, the revised guidelines are going to be clearer and easier to use. Clarifying the review stages and receiving Commission feedback earlier in the process also allows applicants to make improvements in the project before they are too far along. Also, better coordinating with NEPA and Section 106 allows the review process to align with their own internal development process. For staff, the more distinct review stages can also help focus our analysis and result in clearer recommendations to you as the Commission. Earlier Commission guidance provides better direction for staff when we're working with the applicants. And then finally, for the public, shifting reviews earlier allows for appropriate input at the relevant review stages, whether through the Commission meetings or through the NEPA and 106 public participation opportunities. There is some other work that staff is going to be undertaking in parallel with the update of the submission guidelines and environmental policies. Revisions to the NCPC website will also be coordinated with the new guidelines. We believe this will help greatly enhance the experience for all users, including applicants and the public. So here you can see on the screen a snapshot of the draft website as we begin to think about how the guidelines will work with this new format. In addition, staff is going to be preparing some resource guides for a number of topics which are related to the submission process. And these will generally be brief, 2 or 3 pages in length, and describe some particular topic of interest, such as transportation management plans or the role of Section 106. These will also be made available on the website. So in terms of next steps, upon your authorization, the 45-day comment period will commence with notices in the Federal Register. Staff will also hold 2 public meetings to be held on the May 23rd and 25th, and these will include also be noticed in the Federal Register through the NCPC website and in direct outreach with applicant agencies. Staff will, at those meetings, provide a presentation on both the submission guidelines as well as the environmental policies and procedures for comment and feedback. We do expect to return to the Commission for final adoption of both documents later at your September meeting. I'll note that any changes to the environmental policies will have to return to CEQ for their review, and that may impact the schedule. Staff believes that in sum, the proposed changes to the submission guidelines and environmental policies will further improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the plan review process. Therefore, it is the Executive Director's recommendation that the Commission authorize the release of the submission guidelines and the environmental policies and procedures for a 45-day public comment period. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fliss, very much. I think everyone can see that this has been an extraordinarily heavy lift. Modernize and make more efficient our workings, while at the same time ensuring that staff and this commission continues to do its extraordinary diligence on behalf of the federal government, the district government, impacted local citizens, other local governments that host facilities, and citizens at large. So thank you for all the work that you and others have done. Comments from commission members? Mr. May.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd just like to say how much I appreciate the effort that's been put into this. I think the discussion's been going on for some time. I don't know how many months or years, but it's been a while, and I appreciate the outreach that has already occurred. I think that with some of these changes, I'm hoping that it will synchronize better with the Park Services processes, because there were some glitches in how that worked before. Also, that it aligns better with the Commission of Fine Arts review that we all have to go through as well for projects within the district. And I especially appreciate the attention to the Commemorative Works Act review process changes. And I have had the opportunity to review some of that as it was being developed, so I really appreciate that. Overall, the move toward doing things a little bit more simply and plain language and all, I really do appreciate that, and I think it's we've been doing the same thing. We recently updated our NEPA guidelines to make it easier, so when we do an environmental assessment, I no longer automatically say, okay, it'll take you a year and a half at a minimum. We now can do things in just a few months that we couldn't do as quickly before. So and that's across the service. It's been a revision that was long needed. In terms of NCPC's processes, the changes that we've seen over the time that I've been here, which is now almost 9.5 years, have been remarkable. And we've gone from really lengthy, wordy EDRs to, I think, things that are much more straightforward, less redundant. And I appreciate the entirety of that effort. So I think that this is another step in that direction. I think it's really very much welcome. I do have one note of concern, and I haven't been able to digest what's been proposed well enough to understand whether this truly is a concern, but I think that as much as I want to try to lighten the load on the staff of NCPC, I'm a little bit concerned about the prospect that it might actually shift some of that load onto my staff. So I want to be wary of that. So there are going to be some things where we may want to say, we agree with you in principle, but we don't want to have to negotiate another agreement in order to do something cooperatively. So just a note of concern about that. So unless we come up with sort of a standard thing that we just sign every time. So things like that.
At what stage? Can you say more about that? I mean,
not very
I want to
much.
know if there's something I need to worry about too, because I missed that.
No, I mean, I think this came up in the new policy of being able to adopt FONSIs, for example. And we have a very particular way in which we write our FONSIs. And, I certainly would be very happy if the commission wants to adopt that, but I don't want to have to do extra work in writing the FONSIs so that it fits your requirements. So, and that we had a little bit of conversation along those lines before, so it's just, as I said, it's a note of concern. I don't think it's a really big concern. I'm not anticipating we're going to have huge problems about it, but I do want to make sure that we don't wind up creating work for other agencies. I know it's not the intent. Never the intent, but, so, all right, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, I want to echo the very positive comments about the thoughtfulness and extensive nature of the work that you've done to take a look at these. I had a couple of comments and questions. One, I love Appendix A with acronyms. That was really helpful to me. I still have to look these up every once in a while. The other thing is a question about the 5-year expiration on final approvals, and I know you did some focus groups with applicants. I like that idea to keep things fresh. I'm just curious, do you see any pushback on that, or is this earth-shattering? How do you think that's going to work?
Well, I think one of the things that we've heard is that we do have we have approval timeframes on some projects like antennas, so we're not consistent currently, and this helps provide some consistency. But this is just a way to check in and make sure that after a time, 5 years, that a project hasn't changed or new regulations haven't come into place or new policies that might necessitate taking a look at a project. This is also not to say that at 5 years that the project has to come back through the entire process. Mm-hmm. It may be simply, nothing has changed and your approval can continue. So that's the intention.
Thank you.
I also want to echo the hard work and as having someone who's had to deal with some of these at times, it's been, I really appreciate the two things in particular: the organization now by project type so that things are more collected in one place, so you're not searching and not finding what you're looking for so easily. So I think that's really very user-friendly approach here that ought to be, the way it ought to be. So thank you for that. And then also, the alignment of the final NEPA process with the final review process makes so much sense. And it's been difficult to try to almost jury rig the process to make it meet the requirements when it just didn't seem natural. And this seems much more natural in the flow. So I just want to thank you for that and appreciate the hard work. Thank you.
Mr. Cash. I also want to thank for the hard work. Being someone that works on a legislative body, I can very much appreciate lots of policies, procedures, and hoops to go through. And I want to piggyback my comments earlier about Orr Elementary, and I appreciate that in looking at the exception section that there would be an exception for most projects outside of the central area. But I do want to ask the question, so I recall, most of these end up on the consent agenda, but I do recall about a year ago, there was what several members of the public thought was an incredibly ugly firehouse proposed up near Walter Reed. It came here on the non-consent agenda for reasons other than why it was actually here for NCPC approval. And I just wonder how then the staff and the NCPC staff would balance kind of predicting when the public might want to come out and vent on something or have something on the record, even though it's unrelated to actually why it is that we're reviewing it. So if you want to comment a little bit on that, like how you anticipate making those kind of judgment calls.
Well, as proposed, the exemptions would not come to the commission, so they would not be on an agenda because a determination has been made that there's no federal interest. So they would not be coming to the commission for review.
Yeah, well, and I guess my point is just that kind of from a transparency perspective, a lot of people got to come here and vent because they didn't like the building. Maybe that's more of a CFA thing, but I think that there should be maybe some consideration for transparency's sake when you're looking at these projects, and if there's a big constituency that is completely against it for reasons unrelated to comprehensive plan issues or anything like that, and it's aesthetics. I think there sometimes is a value in letting people come out and put their comments on the record. It's on the NCPC transcript and it now lives forever, but there's certain projects maybe just be sensitive that the public might want to weigh in and to kind of balance that exception process.
Okay.
And then last, I'll say that this work began more than a year ago, perhaps nearly 2 years ago, and so therefore much preceded recent White House directives on regulatory efficiency. But this work is very much in keeping with the goals of the White House and OMB on that score, so we are very fortunate in that respect. Are there any additional comments or questions on this? Hearing none, is there the question before us is the 45-day public comment period, and then this will likely come back before us for final approval sometime in September, thereabouts.
So moved.
So it's been moved and seconded. All in favor of the EDR is before you say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Unanimous. Thank you, Mr. Fliss, and everyone very much for this work. The last item on our agenda is an information presentation on planning for Southwest Washington and Buzzard Point. And Mr. Weil, no? No, not Mr. Weil. Okay, sorry. Mr. Gerbich will be with us.
All right. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. Representatives for the District of Columbia Office of Planning, the National Park Service, and Joint Base Meyer-Henderson Hall are here today to provide an overview of projects and planning efforts in the Southwest neighborhoods and Buzzard Point area of Washington, D.C. I'll provide a brief orientation to the area before I turn the presentation over to Patricia Zinksheim, Associate Director of Design with the D.C. Office of Planning, who will review district plans for the area. Commissioner Peter May, Associate Regional Director for Lands and Planning for the National Capital Region of the National Park Service, will then outline NPS plans for Buzzard Point Park. And Ian Frank, Master Planner and Architect at Joint Base Meyer-Henderson Hall, will discuss plans for Fort Leslie J. McNair. Questions or comments will be taken at the conclusion of the information presentation. So for the purposes of this discussion, the Southwest Neighborhoods generally refers to the area bounded by the red dashed line on the right here, with Buzzard Point highlighted in yellow. So this area has seen significant investment in the past several years, and many large and small-scale projects are currently planned or underway in this area. Some of these projects have been reviewed by the Commission, such as the DC United Soccer Stadium, which is currently under construction along 2nd Street Southwest. To help set a policy and design framework to guide development in this area, the district has developed a Southwest Neighborhood Plan and is currently working toward the release of a Buzzard Point Vision Framework and Design Review Guide, which will be discussed. Additionally, the federal government is also investing in Southwest DC and is working to coordinate efforts with the district. The National Park Service is currently creating a development concept plan to determine the future of Buzzard Point Park, which lies along the Anacostia River waterfront. And Fort McNair is working on a master plan for its campus at the confluence of the Potomac and Anacostia rivers. Both of these plans will eventually come to the Commission for review. With that overview, I'll now pass the presentation over to Patricia Zingsheim to talk through the district vision for Southwest DC and Buzzard Point.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, members of the Commission and colleagues at NCPC. I'm very happy to be here to present the Buzzard Point Vision Framework and Design Review Guide, and I look forward to answering or responding to any questions or comments that you have after I conclude my presentation. Tanya Stern is here, Deputy Mayor for Planning, Engagement, and Design, or Deputy Director for Planning, Engagement, and Design in the Office of Planning, and also very involved in the development of this plan for Buzzard Point. The DC Office of Planning, along with the District Department on the Environment, on Energy and the Environment, District Department of Transportation, Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development, and other district agencies, has prepared this vision and design guide and its recommendations with participation from the Capitol Riverfront Bid, Buzzard Point property owners, the Greater Southwest community, the National Park Service, Fort McNair, and PEPCO. Simultaneous to the planning for the new soccer stadium and events venue in Buzzard Point that will provide a destination for the community and the region. We all share aspirations for this area as an area for another emerging neighborhood in central Washington that has the potential to provide our community with an improved and more accessible waterfront, rebuilt infrastructure, critical extension of the Anacostia Riverwalk, new opportunities for places to live and work and start businesses, and access to new regional destinations on DC's southwest waterfront. I guess I have the job of advancing this. Whoops. It skipped some slides. There we go. During the update of the federal elements of the comprehensive plan adopted earlier this year, the Office of Planning and NCPC collaborated to create language highlighting our shared stewardship for design in planning for, protecting, and evolving the character of this city that serves as both the nation's capital and the home of over 680,000 residents. This shared stewardship language can be found in the introduction to the federal elements and will be incorporated into the district elements during the Second Amendment cycle, which is currently underway. The Anacostia Waterfront Initiative is the 30-year, $10 billion effort undertaken in 2002, laying out a strategy for developing a world-class waterfront in the heart of our nation's capital, and subsequently becoming one of the greatest milestones in the story of Washington, D.C.'s development. It integrates multiple transportation, land use, and economic development projects, of which Buzzard Point Peninsula is a key link connecting two areas well underway and you can see them on the graphic here, that being Capitol Riverfront neighborhood to the east, of which Buzzard Point is a part of the bid, as an aside, and the Southwest Waterfront and the wharf development to the west along the Washington Channel. The district's infrastructure investment to date, including the South Capitol Street Corridor project currently underway, is critical to Buzzard Point's future and is providing the armature for extensive private sector investment that in this area. Based on the potential of the area identified in the Anacostia Waterfront Initiative, zoning was undertaken in 2002 and the Capital Gateway overlay was adopted by the Zoning Commission in 2002. It establishes a medium to high density mixed-use area for Buzzard Point with design review for certain development sites within this area based on the significance of the waterfront location as well as the importance of South Capitol Street and the potential for framing the view to the Capitol building. You can see the estimated development yield, so I'm not going to go through that, but it's over 11 million square feet of development with a significant portion of residential. And again, this is an estimated development yield because the particular mix of uses is not mandated within the zoning. District elements of the comprehensive plan include the lower Anacostia waterfront near southwest area element, which includes a South Capitol Street, Buzzard Point policy focus area. In the amendment process to the comprehensive plan that I referred to that's currently underway, the Office of Planning will be recommending that Buzzard Point become its own policy focus area and in order to advance the recommendations that are contained in this vision framework. A sampling of policy and actions currently in the comprehensive plan address land use, focusing on residential, with the emphasis on good design and the recommendation to do detailed planning for this area. So with the development of this vision framework, we will have accomplished the action AW22C there by developing a detailed strategy for the Buzzard Point area. One important consideration in our work and a key starting point was just looking at the history and relationship to Greater Southwest, both in terms of the cultural and the architectural legacy, as well as the circulation and spatial framework of that area. So as stated, the Buzzard Point is at a pivotal location near the thriving and existing southwest neighborhood and along the Anacostia River, with the potential for this relatively vacant area to connect areas to the west, north, east, as well as across the river to Poplar Point and downtown Anacostia. This vision framework seeks an especially strong relationship to neighborhood areas to the north, as well as to Fort McNair and Capitol Riverfront through transportation connectivity, spatial and design relationships, shared services, and programming benefits. This area seeks to benefit from existing architectural and cultural qualities associated with 19th century as well as 20th century modernism and industrial infrastructure. Another thing that the Buzzard Point Vision Framework does is integrate the recommendations of recent plans that the district has completed, not only the Southwest Neighborhood Plan, which is a small area plan at the bottom there, but also other very critical DC plans, including Move DC, Sustainable DC, and Climate Ready DC. The Buzzard Point Peninsula is a highly vulnerable area in the district for flooding from rainwater, riverine, as well as sea level rise, and the plan recommends designs for buildings and public spaces that are resilient and have the ability to adapt to this inevitable relationship with the water. And the FEMA flood insurance rate map is there on the bottom on the right, giving you some idea of what these development areas and projects are facing. The Buzzard Point Peninsula and this vision framework considers the entire peninsula, though the actual study area is as outlined there in the solid yellow, and it's approximately half of the peninsula, with the other 108 acres being Fort McNair. The peninsula also has proximity to the U.S. Capitol, the Nats Stadium, and both local transportation challenges, but also very good regional transportation access with I-295, 395, and 699, or 695, as well as South Capitol Street, 4th Street Southwest, M Street Southeast and Southwest, and the Green Line Metro Rail, 2 stops slightly less than a mile away. Important regional projects include the South Capitol Street itself, Oval Park, Frederick Douglass Bridge project, which is currently a design-build project and not yet under construction, but very close to getting to that point. It also includes the Buzzard Point Park that John mentioned, the National Park Service project, as well as Audi Field and the future development of Poplar Point on the opposite side of the river. One of the few places in the District of Columbia where we have the opportunity to have two-sided riverfront development. The Buzzard Point Vision Framework is a very design-forward plan, as you will see as I complete my presentation. It creates the urban design template for melding environmental conditions, connectivity, and land uses in a way that focuses on creating a highly livable place in the city. So it establishes design guidance and a shared plan, sets expectations for character and quality, and provides a specific design roadmap for public and private sector improvements. There's 3 overarching goals under which all of our recommendations contained in this plan are clustered, and they, the neighborhood goal includes mixed use, resilient, green, and sustainable scenario for the neighborhood, as well as an exceptional level of access to nature along the waterfront. The parks and waterfront section of the plan focuses on the varied types of parks that this neighborhood needs, social spaces, the relationship to Buzzard Point Park, Soccer Plaza, which will also be probably the first public space developed in the neighborhood, neighborhood play spaces, waterfront plaza, as well as semi-private outdoor waterfront spaces. And then finally, the transportation component focuses on the connected grid, South Capitol Street and the Oval as transportation rationalizing investments, additional multimodal service long-term, and focused on improved facilities for bike, pedestrian, and water transportation. A few of the recommendations are listed here in the neighborhood section, and the things I want to point out are the way that land use relates to some of the existing realities of this area. The Oval is obviously a major proposed investment for this area, and this scenario, this urban design framework, clusters the commercial development, hotels, and cultural developments around that oval in the darker red color, and then the residential developments are proposed for the water's edge, as well as to transition between the oval and the higher density development to the existing lower density neighborhood to the north. In addition, the South Capitol Street corridor and the Anacostia Riverwalk are reinforced, and design, as I mentioned earlier, that became part of the zoning for the area, design review, is also an integral concept in creating this well-designed waterfront neighborhood. Parks. In this section, there's a big emphasis on the diversity of park types, the concept of the living shoreline and access to nature, which I mentioned, partnerships and programming. Not only partnerships with the National Park Service and the Capitol Riverfront bid, but also partnerships with the neighborhood and Fort McNair in the programming and maintenance of these spaces, because there's a major opportunity to program soccer stadium plaza, for example, on non-event days, and they're eagerly waiting for neighborhood involvement in determining what that programmatic agenda might be. And finally, our transportation, our well-connected transportation network, the third of the three overarching goals, benefits significantly, this area will benefit significantly from rebuilding pretty much the entire infrastructure in the area, and doing it in, again, a very design-forward way that not only creates streets that are part of the park and open space network of the neighborhood, but streets that are also highly serviceable for stormwater management. This was a very complicated process, but we did study all of the utility locations in order to develop the scenarios for the street network in Buzzard Point. Other key concepts that are part of the transportation network are grid connectivity and water access, which I mentioned. This urban design plan is based on an armature of features and destinations, a potential array of great places, some of which will be regional draws, and they're listed here. And it will be an important design opportunity for all of us going forward to ensure that these places are places that really serve the community well and distinguish our waterfront, and also serve the surrounding neighborhoods. I've mentioned design a lot in this, and the design direction that this document provides. Typically, these are the kinds of things we would develop after a plan is complete, this and other design tools that we've created, but in this particular case, they're all included in the actual Buzzard Point plan. So we wanted to take advantage of the great opportunity we have here to rebuild the area, but also because of the design review that's in place in the zoning. So the plan focuses on providing that kind of guidance. And in terms of our architecture, these are the 5 design principles that we've distilled out for use by the development community, their designers, community stakeholders, other property owners, as well as the various review panels that will be looking at these particular projects. And they're bold architecture, resilient urbanism and high-quality materials, first floors that positively shape public space, massing and transitions, particularly adjacent to lower-scale neighborhood areas, and outdoor spaces for life and activity. In addition to those guidelines, we also have 3 leaflets that we've prepared. The soccer stadium design objectives, which were used during the PUD process for the soccer stadium, and the Buzzard Point streetscape design guidelines, which I've mentioned already, but they go into detail for each street, tree type, material palette, et cetera. And they're also have been in use on every project that's going forward in Buzzard Point. And finally, the Riverwalk design guidelines, which are in use, but to some degree are still still being formulated, particularly for the material palette and some of the plant species. None of these are so prescriptive that they don't allow considerable originality on the part of the individual developments, but they do provide a connecting thread that will connect to the neighborhood and tie the Buzzard Point neighborhood together. I just want to focus on a couple of urban design analyses sketches that we've done. One that shows the potential to design Oval Park as not only a gateway from neighborhoods to the southeast, such as Anacostia and Poplar Point, doorway from the water, but also a kind of meeting place or common ground for surrounding neighborhood areas. And then the sketch on the bottom looks at the relationship to Fort McNair, and an interesting relationship that we discovered while we explored this was that the Q Street entrance, which is the main public entrance to Fort McNair, is currently on axes with the location of the proposed Oval Park, and there's an opportunity to strengthen that relationship, as well as that of other streets that have views to and from Fort McNair and the neighborhood and the future development areas. One last slide, just looking at the ongoing developments in the area. And the greater Southwest, if you take the totals, we're looking at about 6,000, well, actually between 9 and 10 million square feet of development and roughly 3,000 residential units. That includes projects like the Wharf, Waterfront Station, as well as the things that are either things that are recently completed at Waterfront Station, things that are under construction such as the Wharf, and projects that are in the approval process in our office. So all of that taken collectively, 9 to 10 million square feet, 3,000 residential units. And some of the key developments underway, of course, are the 4 predominantly residential projects along the water, 5, 6, 7, and 8, shown here, that all have significant amounts of residential in them. One phase complete, number 8, which was part of the Florida Rock site, and a second one under construction, a third one in planning, and a fourth one to be built, to be designed once the oval size and configuration is final. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to receive any comments you have or answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Ms. Zingheim, very much. It may be prudent to hold our questions until all three. Mr. May, Mr. Gerbich, do you have additional?
No, I was actually going to hand it over to Commissioner May.
Yeah.
Do you need the?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. I was wondering whether I had to stand up. I'm so used to sitting. So.
Yeah.
All right. So this is not my slide. There we go. So thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about our Buzzard Point concept plan. First, I will note by saying that I am the third string on this. Our principal planner for it, our chief of planning, Tammy Stidham, could not be here today because she's gone to the American Planning Association conference for an awards dinner tonight for our regional trails plan. So we're very excited about that, and I want to congratulate her and Andrea Swigert and AECOM for their efforts on that planning effort. And then our regular planner in the office also could not be here, so then it falls to me. So anyway, We'll move on. So I don't think I need to do much in the way of orientation here, but you can see outlined in red there is the parcel that is Buzzard Point. We also have a parcel just to the west of that, which is the James Creek Marina, which is not affected by this particular plan. It is a very strange shape, and as you can see, it includes submerged lands and streets that were mapped onto, I guess, what at one point was land or intention to be land, but in any case, those are the boundaries of the site. It's sort of an unusual circumstance. And toward the middle of it, there you can see the remnants of where we have the sort of stepped boundary is what remains of the Buzzard Point Marina area. That was a marina that we closed last year. It was not really a functioning concession operation, so we've decided to move on, and that gave us this plan. So here you see river access points. I mean, we have a pretty small portion of Buzzard Point, but it's pretty prime real estate, and it is that way because of the connection to the river. And what we have mapped here are the multiple current access points shown in white, and then the potential access points, so that if you want to put in a kayak or canoe or something, these are places where you can get access to the Anacostia. So this highlights some of those potential access points. One is part of the development that was in Patricia's presentation at 1900 Half Street, which has already gotten its zoning approvals, and I'm not sure when they're going to go to construction, but hopefully sometime soon. And it does include a substantial riverfront access as well. Diamond Teague Dock, this is an existing location, and then Yards Park as well. And further upriver, the Anacostia Community Boathouse. If you've not been up the Anacostia lately, it's pretty impressive what's happening on that side of the river. So I would strongly encourage it. And you can take the Anacostia Riverwalk Trail, a beautiful bicycle ride, up from the South Capitol Street Bridge all the way up to Bladensburg. So this is just highlighting some of the adjacent developments. I don't need to go into that. I think that was all covered by Patricia's presentation. So we have been working through this planning process for a little more than a year now, and the plan was to try to develop something that was going to provide much better access. I don't know if anybody had been down to Buzzard Point Marina, but it really was not a terrific place. And what we were trying to do is make it into a terrific place and a benefit for all the people who we see, who we know are already in the nearby community, but also the people who will be coming to live and work in Buzzard Point. So this just outlines the process that we've been going through, and the plan is done and in the printing stage. This is just some of what we heard from the public: distinctive park setting, water-based activities, trail connections, naturalizing the site, and water access with minimal development. So one of the interesting things that we did in this planning process is that we did a visual survey. And it was done in meetings, and it was also done online. And we gave members of the public the opportunity to look at things that from other places, and they could tell us what they liked and what they didn't like. And so apparently they didn't like duck boats in this location. But there are lots of really interesting things that they did like. And of course, I think what we're seeing here is in terms of a common theme is sort of a highly developed shoreline, a very urban shoreline. And I think that people wanted to have a more natural setting, and that's what we see in the most favored images. So it is those opportunities to get into the water. The opportunities for artwork we see on the sort of the middle to the left, those things that look like flying birds are actually artwork. And places for people to come and sit and be near the water. So those are the things that we are focusing on. So we have developed a couple of concepts. Now, this is not an environmental assessment accompanying a planning effort, so it is very conceptual, and we would hope to follow this with a full planning effort and full design effort. But we tried to look at this just to see what could be done and to see if we can generate some excitement around it, because I think ultimately to build this, we will require the help of some partners. This is a section through, I think one of the the deeper sections, the wider sections of area. And we are including a number of features, some areas for play, the so-called rec pods, but also open lawn and of course, river walk and river trail access, and some attempt to segregate, say, cyclists from pedestrians. So these are images of what the water access might be like. I'm not sure that what I really think of the one on the lower right there, but again, this is highly conceptual. And then these are some more images of from the same concept, different parts, a section of lawn, and the river walk. And that's a sort of a fountain feature on the left there. Oh, and there it is again. So this is a second concept, which actually puts an elevated multi-use trail out over the river. This would be a lot more complicated to accomplish for reasons that I think we all understand. And this is what this section through that looks like. So we put the trail up and out. I mean, it gives you the advantage of allowing you to be out there over the river, but it also kind of obstructs the view from the shore. So, but these are the sort of things that we'll look at in more detail when we advance the design. So again, some images of that. An attempt to sort of segregate with the paving materials the cyclists from walkers, and ability to get right down close to the river. And again, more of the same, some of the same features, the grassy areas and play structures. So final plan was completed, and we have to work to close the paper streets that sort of divide up the land. We're looking forward to trying to move this into an environmental assessment and do additional design work. We don't have the money at this moment, but we have some leads. So hopefully we will find some good friends who will help us push this forward. And of course, we're working with DC agencies and adjacent property owners. So that's our presentation. Thank you very much.
Then Mr. Ian Frank, Master Planner Architect at Fort McNair. Welcome.
John, I don't know if I know how to use this thing. So. Okay. Well, thank you for having us here. For having me here, I'm representing Joint Base Meyer-Henderson Hall. It was BRAC'd in 2005 with Joint Base Meyer-Henderson Hall on the Virginia side and Fort McNair on the DC side. We're now in the throes of revising our master plan, and it's a mandate, a DoD mandate, that all DoD facilities, installations rather, conform to sustainability requirements and collaborative process. So that's at the heart and soul of the revision to the master plan. We just finished in April the 7th. We just finished our ADP at Fort McNair, and it was a planning charrette that exemplified the collaborative effort. It had a host of stakeholders, including of which, and we want to give special thanks to Pat and to Tanya, who represented NCPC and DC Office of Planning, along with other stakeholders. We're very appreciative for the chance to share and to integrate in with what it is that's going on here, which we find very exciting. So I prepared a couple of slides. Normally on the slides you saw before, they weren't very colorful, so for McNair, so I added a little bit of color to it. So I hope you enjoy it. There are just a couple of slides because we just ran out of time. But anyway, I just want to give you some oversights, a little bit of view. The concentration of what we're trying to get across today is that the purpose of the ADP, one of the main purposes is an integration of systems. And that sounds abstract and all that kind of thing. You know what that involves is open space, interlocked or connected. It's a connectedness with what happens on our base, behind the wall, and what happens in our community and the other side of the wall. So this opportunity to be collaborative and to share with DC Office Planning gave us that kind of connectedness, and we were able to see what initiatives you guys had envisioned and what it is we needed to hook up to. So that is a preface. The current 2013 master plan, again, was required to be integrated and to be sustainable. Sustainable is about finding ways to afford the future, what the decisions are today. And one way for sustainability also is to connect, and we're not working in a vacuum, we're working in a community, and to be constantly aware of that, and to have that as an intrinsic part of our master plan. So the ADP is a roadmap for our future. It's a 20-year plan. It has notional buildings, notional sites that have been developed. Our Fort McNair site is very constricted, very constrained, is old. It has a fidelity restriction and a necessity to maintain its integrity historically. It's a historic district on the National Register. And so because of those restrictions, we don't have very much room for expansion and all that kind of thing that you have in this lovely area of Southwest Washington. So to deal with that, what we found is, and you can see it on, this is one plan that shows that morphology from 200 years ago, thereabouts, to the present is what we have, and then the future is after the charrette. We looked for opportunities and found some because of the insightful views of those present, and we're showing them there. But more fruitful drawing, a little drawing, is the next slide, and I don't know how to do that. Okay, so that one. This one is chock full of stuff. But again, because of the excitement that we had in the short time to put all this together, I wanted to just get some of this in here just so we could take it away with us and see what it is we're so excited about. So the ADP as a roadmap. The ADP 20 years out, we have to be able to have something that sets our sights on a vision, something that is able to materialize a vision. And because we don't know what the future will bring, but we suspect we have certain ideas, we want to be able to bring out a fruitful layout for the site plan that maintains its integrity and fidelity and its historic legacy. So that's, there you can see that dotted line in the center of the fields. Why, that's a central axis, prominent axis. That'll be maintained. But alongside, if you go back to the previous slide, which you don't have to do, well, you can see the early McKinley and White plan all the way on the left shows how there is a development of buildings along the shorelines. And that's on the east and west. North is up orientation-wise. And so you can see that we have extended, we found more buildable sites. At first, we looked at this, and before we went into the charrette, we were very concerned that we wouldn't be able to find too many buildable sites. We did. And so you see off to the south, the bottom part, and the left, that's the west side, and some to the east side on the south tip. We were able to find buildable sites. That increases the capacity and usability and the availability for this beautiful site to be used fruitfully. And so there you see that. Let me just say that the area development plan takes its heart and soul from a vision, and the vision was a collectively created by our charrette folks, and I'm going to read it to you because it's one that gives heart and soul to this plan. The Fort McNair will preserve the historic legacy of iconic buildings and landscapes while embracing modernization, improving pedestrian circulation, and integrating in with the urban fabric. So out of that fall goals, and the goals are directly correlated to that statement. Our role, we have a significant role not only in the nation's capital, as a premier nation's capital region defense force. We are the home of MDW headquarters, a military district of Washington, Pershing's United States Army band under MDW, the Judge Adjutant, the Center for Military History, and the list goes on. We have a very deep and long tradition and legacy to uphold, and we all, anyone working on this and on the Army installations realize that and appreciate it. But we can go further. One way to go further is to extend and enhance our collateral responsibilities as a good neighbor in D.C., and that we intend to do. My boss, Chief Peter Herons, has a long history of urban planning and community planning, and along with the group, sees this as an exciting opportunity to move forward. So we have an integration of systems. The ones that we want to concentrate on for this presentation are those that tie into, integrate with DC and CPC's planning and some of the National Park Service. So one category of improvements that we want to incorporate in, and again, this has not been vetted yet for NCPC and CFA. This is a conceptual, preliminary, very preliminary. So one category of work that you can see reflected in some of this is improve the fitness and recreation, because that's what the visions of and what we've seen examples of for DC and DC Office of Planning. Along the shoreline, along the river walk, we want to tap into that. We look for opportunities on our base, on the garrison, for a continuity, to bring more continuity in the walk paths and in the fitness paths, and to encourage more pedestrian opportunities. Also, we have seen the focus that Pat alluded to, that showed us from the oval park that's proposed to our Q Street entrance at 2nd Street, and you can see it. That's node. I can't see it from here, but you can. It's node number node 2. N2 is the way that's designated. That red thing on the west, the center west. That is, we'll look at that, see how we can strengthen that and reinforce that kind of attitude of focal point and experience. So providing continuity in the walk paths, you can see the red dotted lines going north to south, that we want to use the share in the opportunities and the beauty of the Washington Channel and the Anacostia, and by doing that, bringing this continuity of walk paths is something that we could set our sights on. So if funding becomes available, we can accomplish that. We already have some walk paths, we can extend them. And we could tie into the river walk that's going to be extended north and then up 2nd Street and then to east and west along P Street. We could tie into those at the gates. We could connect those walk paths in the garrison, to the garrison, through those entry points and exit points on the garrison to accomplish that integration, that tie. Let's see, we want to improve the garrison exterior. Pat pointed out that it's a lovely experience walking along the perimeter of our base, even though it's not just a blank wall, it's a kind of restrained, articulated wall. It's beautiful in its intrinsic value, and we could make sure that we spend money enough to repair that wall when it needs it, and so to preserve it. So this idea of preservation is very much a part of what we want to do, and this ADP has what falls out of it is a prioritized list of things. So that enhancement along the perimeter wall is one aspect that we want to try to incorporate in. Another category of work is the enhancement, the revitalization, the strengthening and the definition of nodes. Nodes are the confluence of walk paths and of activity areas. We see that that's going on as part of your DC plan, and we want to do that where we have the opportunity to do that. One is at the Q Street entrance, the main entrance to the base, to the garrison. Another one is up at G1. We were thinking that we would take that entry point and we would convert what now is a street that's vehicular and pedestrian to keep vehicles out of that street and to turn it over to a pedestrian walkway that accentuates and revitalizes that long axis north to south with a focal point to the War College all the way at the south. So that's an idea we had to do. the walkability that's provided by these gates and by these continuity of paths goes a long way to enhancing our potential for interaction with the community. It gives us the accessibility. It gives us a lot of exciting new developments with our neighbors, and so we want to share in that, and we want to find ways to do it. So revitalizing the community and neighborhood, enhancing existing, these are categories that that we here at DC Planning and see evidence of it in their planning work that we want to tie into. The revitalizing of the community is essential. The enhancement of existing community opportunities for social reaction via access and creation of amenities that provide fitness, very important to us, to the Army and to the military. Fitness is something that we it's atop the list of costs and affordance, and it's in the healthy atmosphere, healthy environment, and culture that we want to further. So this accessibility and this tie into the Riverwalk, into the exciting new developments at the stadium and the Oval Park have that kind of opportunity for interaction, social interaction, and fitness. So they're all good, and that's part of our plan. This diagram you'll take away with you, hopefully, will show you more specifics. Some of those blue arrows that you see point to primary factors that tie into initiatives, that tie into what's going on in the DC planning. I can't cover them all because of the lack of time. John, am I up? Okay. Yeah, I've got the heart and soul of it, I think. But I want to thank you all. We want to thank you all for having us, for joining in this process and having us be part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frank, very much, and to Peter and Ms. Zingheim. Clearly, this is a very exciting project. It's an extension to all of our years of work on the Southwest Eco District, so Southwest is going to be the place to be after Anacostia, of course.
Thank you.
So this is very exciting.
They're ready for us.
Ms. White.
Can I just ask a quick question? And Commissioner May, if you wouldn't mind, if we could go back in your presentation where you, in the very beginning, you had a broader view of the river. And just for orientation and my own curiosity, where is the 11th Street Bridge project? And what's the relationship between that effort and this effort? Because there's some similar
The 11th Street Bridge
goals.
project is, I guess, between the two outer rings there. It's you see where it says Washington Navy Yard? Yeah, there you go. There's the 11th Street Bridge. So, and you can see, I guess is that narrow span meant to be it might be meant to, no, that's the local span of the 11th Street Bridge project. So the 11th Street Bridge Park would be just downriver of that narrower span there. It is it's all part of the Anacostia Waterfront Initiative. It all gets blended into that, but from our planning perspective, it's about two things. It's tying into the Riverwalk, and it's to tie into the river trail, if you will, right? Being able to go from one place to another along the river stops.
I was just wondering if there was any coordination there. Community engagement is so extensive and their focus on equity and
we coordinate with them a lot. We spend a lot of time with them on the 11th Street Bridge Park, but not specific to Buzzard Point. And we have so much going on across up the entire Anacostia.
No, I think it's interesting. There's so much synergy along the river.
Yeah.
That's why I was curious how that was being coordinated.
Right.
Thanks.
Mr. Cash.
Could I find any slide that kind of has the street grid just on Buzzard Point, like kind of a little more zoomed in? And while you do that, I'll just say, so I think that one of the really important things that was brought up in the district's portion was talking about how looking at the planning for these district projects, it's really important that both comp plans really sync up, because when you're looking at these things in isolation, I mean, for example, Fort McNair, it might be great that we get a master plan that comes here and we talk about parking minimums and all that in the context of Fort McNair, and that's great. But one of the things I want to say is, it's kind of zoomed out here, but Q Street, where that northern Fort McNair entrance is, so Right now, there's only access in to the bottom of the point is Half Street, which is a two-way street that goes north and south, 1 lane each. And then Second Street, which would be kind of down the middle of this, which after you get to Fort McNair's entrance is a one-way street down. And one of the biggest concerns that the community's had with 60,000 people or units going in. Now, how many units or people are going to be in the new Buzzard Point?
Potentially 6,000.
Oh, 6,000, sorry. And with that many people, there's literally because we closed actually one of the streets to accommodate the stadium, there was potentially going to be only 1 lane of traffic that even got up there. And if you talk about closing a P Street entrance on Fort McNair, there's a lot of things when you look at it from both planning perspectives. Closing the P Street entrance on Fort McNair could exacerbate a lot of the traffic concerns that already are. So, I mean, there's been I know the Zoning Commission is looking at it, and there was a proposal to reopen part of First Street. But it's just really important looking at all these different projects that don't necessarily come to us for review of the impacts on the surrounding community, because this one it's physically a pretty tight space down there with a lot of exciting stuff going on, and a planning effort on Fort McNair might not even touch on some of the accessibility problems that are potentially there. That's just kind of a comment.
I can say a little bit about the transportation overall. There's, of course, the notion to improve the multimodal access, which includes additional bike, ped, and bus service to this area, including circulator on event days associated with the soccer stadium. So many of those things are in work under consideration with WMATA as well as our District Department of Transportation. The grid connectivity, which you described, there will be some changes. There's the rationalization of circulation in general that occurs as part of the Oval and South Capitol Street project. That's more important than it might seem to this area. And in terms of just organizing the movements in the area and the through traffic. Second Street will become a two-way street with a bike lane, protected bike lane. The traffic is managed over toward 4th Southwest, the local traffic, so that it isn't coming through willy-nilly the neighborhood to the north, because that was a great concern of theirs. So those are some of the themes in terms of transportation. I think on game days we're looking at or event days, because there'll probably be more than just the 20-day soccer games. But on those days, transportation from the 2 metro stops will be important. But no doubt about it, the management of transportation in this area is extremely important, and DDOT has done preliminary work on that. They don't have a formal management plan because it's too soon for that. They do have the evidence of their track record relative to the Nats Stadium for managing game day events, and they're balancing with DC United the coincidence of events so that there aren't big baseball events at the same time that there's big soccer events. But this is a peninsula, and with that goes the challenges of being a peninsula. I think one of the most exciting things is that I just learned about a little over a week ago is that WMATA is actually studying a bus loop into this area, and it's not definitely funded and approved yet, but it's under consideration. So that would be exciting for both the Southwest neighborhood as well as the property owners that are currently working on developments in Buzzard Point. Was there any other part you wanted me to
I mean, a lot of it
address?
was just making the general observation about, in an area like this where we have the district's interest, but we also have a very large federal interest, just really the importance of coordinating the planning efforts when in a vacuum you might seem like you wouldn't need to, but just making sure that you're taking those things into account.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that is a really good point, because last week we had an event with the property owners to update them on the content of this final plan. And in attendance was someone from Fort McNair, and our goal going forward is to have far better coordination on the forts, the data, and the metrics about the comings and goings and the peaks at the fort, so that DDOT can look at the signalization and other issues in the Buzzard Point neighborhood with that in mind. And I know the fort has some goals for some signalization improvements in the area. And so getting that conversation going is what we're hoping will happen.
Any final, Mr.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'm with McNair. I'm waiting for you to come. I'd like to ask you a question, please.
Yes, sir.
It's an easy one for you.
Try.
Yeah, well, it's not going to be hard. It's probably going to be a yes or no. But you mentioned history and exercise and healthy stuff. Is the golf course gone forever?
Sir, we will look into that. We just have to find how big a bankroll you have.
Well, it was a pretty, sort of a shabby course, but it was a nice little course.
You know,
But it's been gone for a while, hasn't it?
it probably has
Comes-
been.
yeah.
I've only been there almost coming on 2 years. So
Yeah, they had
can't
night
really say, but
golf.
I heard about it, that it
They had
was
night golf.
night golf.
Tricky.
We'll look into it. It may not be a priority, but we'll look.
Yeah, well, that's exactly.
Thank you, Mr. Frank. Mr. May.
Before you go away, come on back. So, I have one question about, I mean, the nodes that you were showing, all the access points and the pedestrian. I mean, is there any hope that there would be public access through the fort as a result of that, or is it all just for base residents and workers?
I don't know if I'm on or not, but.
You're on.
Okay, the public access is now on Second Street.
Right.
And the reason it's on the Second Street entrance is because there is a component, a vehicle search component that's
Right.
necessary, crucial. So that is the public entrance. Whether there be another public entrance, I suspect that without a DOD card or a CAT card, I think that's going to be hard to fund. Okay.
It's a funding issue?
Yeah, because there are guards and there is security devices or security devices that
Right.
are part and parcel of that. However, I didn't get a chance to, but on that very colorful second slide, we're looking at a, what is it called, a pedestrian gate. And that might be
Well, I see it
able
there
to
next
be
to the-
networked in such a way
Yeah.
to allow, to recognize the fact that there's a vision of an embarkation point there, there's development across the street, that we might be able to do something about that. And we're looking at the possibility, we have to discuss with you, for having a parking.
Well, that was my
structure.
second topic. Don't go there yet.
Okay, I probably, I won't go
Because
there.
I got things about to say about that. No, I mean, what I'm really curious about is, because right now, the Riverwalk Trail, you know, in the way it's mapped, goes up the street on the east side of the fort, and it would be really great if you could actually go in and through the fort.
That is a concern for us. The way it is now, even without the population expansion, without the development.
Hold the mic there, there you go.
Without all the development even,
Yeah.
it's a concern for us, security-wise, obviously, because we're right on the shoreline. There are homes there that, with folks in them that,
Yeah, there
it's
are
a
homes-
seawall.
There are homes outside there with
No,
folks in them,
it's
too.
true, it's true. But these are officials that, you know, that are guarded.
I understand the challenges. I just
But
think that we should be,
We did and will look at opportunities to work that.
Okay.
And there are some ideas,
Yeah.
we'll be pleased to discuss them with you.
Yeah.
This is probably not the form because.
no, that's fine. I'm just trying to
Yes,
suggest it
absolutely.
and,
We're
you
open to
know,
what we all, there are those among that charrette folk, among the group that want to do that very thing.
I'm sure there are a lot of people who want to do it, and you know, we've struggled with the same thing over at the Navy Yard, but somehow they managed to figure out a way to let folks go along the river across the Navy Yard. I know that there's a fence there that separates the Riverwalk from the Navy Yard.
Actually,
but-
there is not a fence. There's just a river walk. It's just a wall. It's
Well,
just
there's a
not-
fence that gets closed at certain times, so you can't go through 24/7.
Okay.
But in any case.
Okay.
The point is that it's really nice to be able to stay along the river when you're on the Riverwalk.
Totally agree.
And the second thing is that, yeah, I did notice the joint use parking garage on Park Service property, and
Sorry about that.
we have a whole lot to talk about
Yeah,
that.
no, we
'cause
do,
that's
we
not
do.
something that we would.
We do, and we were cautioned not.
Let me,
Yeah, sorry.
it's just something that we would not typically do. So we have a whole lot to talk
Yeah,
about there.
yeah.
That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any last comments? Hearing none. This, notwithstanding our rather short agenda, this was a very substantive meeting today. So thank you all very much. And so with that, I believe we stand adjourned.
They just got a raise.
Yeah.